All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're talking about Vincent Arthur Smith, the man who, for all intents and purposes, wrote the very first modern political history of ancient India for the Western world. He literally created the timeline that historians relied on for decades. But, and this is a big but, there's a huge catch. And that catch brings us right to this question: who actually gets to write a nation's history? It sounds simple, right? But the answer is incredibly complicated, and it's the absolute key to understanding Vincent Smith's legacy, both why it's so important and why it's so controversial. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at who Smith was, how his job in the British Empire gave him this incredible advantage, what he actually managed to build, the imperial lens he saw everything through, and finally, what his flawed but foundational legacy means for us today. Okay, so let's start with the central paradox of Vincent Smith. His work is totally indispensable. It gave a structure, a backbone to ancient Indian history where there wasn't one before. But at the same time, it's torn apart by critics for its colonial point of view. So how can it be both of those things at once? So who was this guy? Well, Vincent Smith was an Irish civil servant working for the British Empire. Now, the most important thing to know about him is that he wasn't a historian by training. Not at all. He was an administrator, a bureaucrat. And that dual role right there is the key to his entire story. He was writing history from inside the very machine that was ruling India. You see, to really get his books, you first have to get his job. His career as a colonial administrator wasn't just some side gig. It was the very thing that made his historical work possible. It was his training ground. And here's a quick snapshot of his life. He was born in Dublin, joins the elite Indian Civil Service, the ICS, in 1867, and then spends the next 30-plus years as an administrator in North India. And get this, it's only after he retires in 1900 that he really buckles down to write and publish the histories he'd been piecing together for decades. This really shows you his secret weapon. As a magistrate and collector, his 9-to-5 job gave him direct, boots-on-the-ground access to the raw materials of history. He could personally handle ancient coins, decipher stone inscriptions, trek out to archaeological sites, and dig through local records. Think about it. No academic sitting in a library in London could even dream of that kind of access. So with this incredible, one-of-a-kind access, he decided to take on a monumental task. You have to understand, for Western scholars at the time, ancient Indian history felt like this vast, tangled, undated mess of events. Smith's goal was to tame it, to wrestle it into a clear, chronological, political story that made sense. And his most famous book was The Early History of India. I mean, this thing became the standard textbook for generations. It laid out a timeline from the earliest moments all the way up to the Gupta Empire. He also wrote one of the first truly modern biographies of the Emperor Ashoka. And he did it by relying heavily on the emperor's own words, the inscriptions carved on pillars and rocks all across the subcontinent. He really helped put figures like Ashoka on the map for Western historians. And then there was his massive survey, The Oxford History of India. This was the book that really cemented his reputation as the top authority on the subject. For a long, long time, this was a fixture in British schools and universities. So how did he do it? Well, he had a method, and it was pretty systematic. Step 1, gather the physical evidence, the coins, the inscriptions, the archaeology. Step 2, use all that stuff to establish a reliable timeline. Who ruled and when did they rule? And finally, step 3, weave all those facts together into a political story about kings, dynasties, and empires. It was simple, it was effective, and for its time, it was revolutionary. Okay, but here's where the story takes a sharp turn. That same systematic, administrative mind that let him organize history, well, it also put blinders on him. The lens that helped him see the timeline also badly distorted the picture he was painting. And this comparison just lays it all out perfectly. Smith's history, it's all about kings and dynasties, battles and conquests. It's a highlight reel of great rulers. So what's missing? Just about everything else. The history of society, of the economy, of culture and art, the lives of everyday people, it's just not there. And look, these weren't just accidental omissions. They flowed directly from his biases as a man of the British Empire. He saw India's past through a European lens, always looking for the kings and empires he was familiar with. He truly believed that strong autocratic rulers were necessary for India, a view that, surprise, surprise, conveniently justified British rule. And his work often painted this picture of Indian civilization as static, basically just waiting around for outsiders to come and shape things up.
So this brings us to the big finish, trying to make sense of his complicated legacy. How do we evaluate a pioneer who laid a foundation that we now see as, well, fundamentally flawed?
This table really sums up the whole balancing act. On one side, you have to give him credit for his pioneering work. He created a structured timeline out of chaos. He popularized huge figures like Ashoka. He championed using actual archaeological evidence. But on the other side, the limitations are severe. His work is completely filtered through British imperial ideology. It's obsessed with great men and war, and it almost totally ignores the rich social and cultural history of India itself. So what's the final verdict? Well, today, historians see Smith as a foundational figure, but one you have to handle with care. His books are still used, especially for getting dates and timelines straight, but always with this critical awareness, this giant asterisk, reminding you of the colonial worldview they were born from. We can use the house he built, but we have to be fully aware of its flawed foundations. And that leaves us with one final, pretty heavy thought. If Vincent Smith's version of history was so deeply shaped by his era, the Age of Empire, it really forces us to ask ourselves, how is our era, with all of its own values, its politics, and its blind spots, shaping the history that we're writing right now?